Have you ever heard of the 12 tribes of Israel? They are mentioned throughout the Bible, but what do we really know about them? Who were their founders, and why do these tribes play such an important role in biblical history and in God's plan for humanity? Do the tribes of Israel represent just an ancient chapter of history, or does their influence still echo today? In this video, we will unravel the mysteries of these tribes, explore their origins, and understand what happened to them over time. Before we start, leave a comment about what you know about the tribes of Israel. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue this fascinating journey. Now let's dive into this story, full of meaning and mystery. It all begins with Jacob, also known as Israel, grandson of Abraham and son of Isaac. Jacob had 12 sons, each of whom became the founder of one of the tribes of Israel. These sons, however, were not just names in a genealogy. Their stories are full of family drama, rivalries, and moments of redemption. Reuben, the firstborn, lost his position of prominence by committing a serious offense against his father. Simeon and Levi were marked by violence when avenging their sister Dinah. Judah, on the other hand, emerged as a leader, being the direct ancestor of David and later of Jesus. Each of Jacob's sons had a unique personality, and their actions shaped the destiny of the tribes that would emerge. Before he died, Jacob gathered his 12 sons to give them a blessing, which was also a prophecy about the future of each tribe. But these words were not just praises. Some of them were severe warnings. In Genesis 49, Jacob predicted the fate of each tribe, from Judah's strength to Reuben's instability. These blessings shaped not only the immediate future of the tribes, but also the way they positioned themselves in the history of Israel. Did Reuben, Simeon, and Levi overcome Jacob's harsh words? And why were Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, and Naphtali mentioned so mysteriously? After Jacob's blessing, the tribes grew and multiplied in Egypt. The book of Exodus tells us how these 12 families became a large nation, living under the Pharaoh's slavery. But how did the time in Egypt influence the tribes? Did they keep their separate identities, or did they begin to mix? The liberation of Israel, led by Moses, was a landmark for the tribes. They were no longer just families descended from Jacob. Now, they were God's chosen people, with a specific mission in the divine plan. However, even in freedom, conflicts and challenges arose among them. After years in the desert, the 12 tribes finally entered the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership. Each tribe received a portion of the land, according to God's instructions. But this territorial division was not just geographic, it also reflected the gifts and challenges of each tribe. Judah received a large portion in the south, while Ephraim and Manasseh, descendants of Joseph, were divided into 2 tribes, expanding their influence. Levi, on the other hand, received no land, as they were designated as the priestly tribe, serving the Lord. But this division also brought disputes and rivalries that would continue for centuries. After years wandering in the desert, the 12 tribes of Israel finally began to settle in the Promised Land. Under Joshua's leadership, each tribe received a portion of land, a space that represented both a blessing and a responsibility. The tribe of Judah, for example, received a large portion in the south, including Jerusalem, which would later become Israel's spiritual capital. Ephraim and Manasseh, descendants of Joseph, received fertile and strategic lands. On the other hand, the tribe of Levi, chosen for the priesthood, did not receive their own lands, but were spread among the other tribes to serve as intermediaries between God and the people. But did this division bring peace and unity? Or did the rivalries among the tribes begin to intensify, creating challenges for God's promise? After Joshua's death, the period of the judges marked a phase of challenges for the tribes of Israel. Without a central leader, each tribe began to act independently, often coming into conflict with one another. In Judges 1:27-36, we see that not all the tribes managed to completely expel the Canaanite peoples, which led to dangerous alliances and the influence of pagan practices. The tribe of Judah, for example, received a large portion in the south, including Jerusalem, which would later become Israel's spiritual capital. Ephraim and Manasseh, descendants of Joseph, received fertile and strategic lands. On the other hand, the tribe of Levi, chosen for the priesthood, did not receive their own lands, but were spread among the other tribes to serve as intermediaries between God and the people. But did this division bring peace and unity, or did the rivalries among the tribes begin to intensify, creating challenges for God's promise? After Joshua's death, the period of the Judges marked a phase of challenges for the tribes of Israel. Without a central leader, each tribe began to act independently, often coming into conflict with one another. In Judges 1:27-36, we see that not all the tribes managed to completely expel the Canaanite peoples, which led to dangerous alliances and the influence of pagan practices. However, God raised judges to guide the people and unite the tribes in times of crisis. Deborah, one of the most notable leaders, led a joint effort among the tribes against the Canaanites. Gideon, from the tribe of Manasseh, faced the Midianites with a small army, showing that victory came from faith, not numbers. But were these temporary victories enough to maintain unity among the tribes? Or were cultural and territorial differences beginning to create deep fissures among God's people? The division among the tribes became more evident over time. Without a central government, territorial and cultural disputes increased. It was in this context that the people asked God for a king, and Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin, was chosen. However, his leadership was marked by conflicts, and God chose another leader, David, from the tribe of Judah. David not only united the tribes around a spiritual capital, Jerusalem, but also established the royal lineage that would culminate in the Messiah. But was this unity lasting? Or would the differences among the tribes continue to challenge God's plan for Israel? The promise of unity among the tribes began to crumble after Solomon's death. His son, Rehoboam, failed to maintain harmony, leading 10 northern tribes to rebel under Jeroboam's leadership. Thus, the kingdom of Israel was divided into two parts: the northern kingdom, with 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom led by Judah and Benjamin. This division was not just political, it also brought a spiritual rupture. While Judah remained faithful to the temple in Jerusalem, the northern kingdom established its own worship centers, often falling into idolatrous practices. Did this division mark the beginning of the end for the 12 tribes of Israel? Despite divisions and conflicts, each tribe had a unique role in God's plan. Judah emerged as the lineage of the Messiah. Levi remained the priestly tribe, connecting the people to God through worship and sacrifice. Dan, mentioned in Genesis 49 as a serpent, faced challenges in his role as judge. Each tribe contributed in a unique way to Israel's history. But are these roles still relevant today? What happened to the tribes throughout history, especially after the Babylonian exile? Did they all survive, or did some disappear forever? The fate of the 12 tribes of Israel began to change dramatically in the 8th century BC. After years of idolatry and division, the northern kingdom, composed of 10 tribes, fell into the hands of the Assyrian Empire. In 2 Kings 17:6, we read, "In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and took Israel into exile in Assyria." This event marked the beginning of the dispersion of the so-called lost tribes. The Assyrians had a policy of displacing conquered populations, scattering the Israelites across different parts of the empire. But what happened to these tribes? Did they disappear forever, or did they continue to exist, hidden throughout history? While the northern kingdom fell, Judah, the southern kingdom, managed to survive for over a century. Judah and Benjamin, the two main tribes of this region, maintained their identity and worship at the temple in Jerusalem. However, even they were not exempt from God's judgment. In 586 BC, the kingdom of Judah also faced exile, this time at the hands of the Babylonian Empire. But unlike the tribes of the north, the Jews of the south eventually returned to their land, maintaining their identity as God's people. This raises a question. Why were some tribes preserved while others became lost? So what happened to the 10 northern tribes? This is one of the greatest mysteries of biblical history. Many believe they disappeared forever, assimilated by other cultures and losing their identity. However, over the centuries, various theories have emerged about their fate. One theory suggests that the tribes spread across the world, establishing communities in unexpected places. Some claim that descendants of the tribes can be found in Ethiopia, India, and even Japan. Others believe the tribes are among the native peoples of America or the Celts of Europe. Are these connections real, or are they just attempts to fill gaps in history? Some scholars point to biblical passages suggesting that the lost tribes were never truly lost. In Ezekiel 37, for example, the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones is often interpreted as a promise of restoration not only for Judah, but for all of Israel. In Amos 9:9, God promises, "I will shake the house of Israel among all the nations, as grain is shaken in a sieve, and not a single grain will fall to the ground." There are also historical and archaeological accounts suggesting that small groups from the northern tribes may have returned to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. Did these tribes merge with Judah, forming what we know today as the Jewish people? Or did they maintain their identities in secret, waiting for the right moment to reappear? Even if the northern tribes were lost in history, their role in God's plan remains relevant. In Revelation 7, we find a list of the 12 tribes sealed by God, an image that symbolizes the redemption and restoration of His people. This reminds us that, for God, nothing is truly lost. Will the lost tribes reappear in the last days, fulfilling a specific purpose in God's divine plan? Or is their story a reminder that God is faithful, even when we stray from His ways? The mystery of the lost tribes continues to intrigue us, but it also inspires us to trust in God's greater plan for humanity. While the 10 northern tribes disappeared in the Assyrian dispersion, the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi survived the Babylonian exile. These remnants formed the basis of Jewish identity after returning to the Promised Land. In Ezra and Nehemiah, we read about the reconstruction of Jerusalem and the temple, marking a new beginning for God's people. Judah, the tribe from which the Messiah would come, maintained its spiritual and political leadership. Benjamin, despite being a smaller tribe, remained allied with Judah, sustaining the southern kingdom. And the tribe of Levi continued its priestly function, playing a central role in worship and teaching the law. But how did these 3 tribes influence the history that followed? And what does this teach us about God's faithfulness, even in the face of loss and dispersion? After the exile, Judaism began to consolidate around traditions and scripture. The temple was rebuilt and again became the spiritual center of the Jewish people. The tribe of Levi played a fundamental role in this process, organizing worship, sacrifices, and the preservation of the law of Moses. Judah, in turn, became synonymous with Jewish identity. Over time, the term Jew came to refer to all descendants of Israel, even those who were not originally from the tribe of Judah. This consolidation was crucial for the survival of the faith amid new challenges such as Persian, Greek, and Roman domination. But did this centralization around Judah and Levi leave out the other tribes? Did the focus on the messianic lineage and the priesthood obscure the diversity that once existed among the tribes of Israel? The promise of God to the tribe of Judah was fulfilled centuries later with the birth of Jesus. In Genesis 49:10, Jacob prophesied that the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come. Jesus, a descendant of David, fulfilled this prophecy, establishing a spiritual kingdom that transcends the boundaries of Israel. The lineage of Judah not only upheld the promise of a messianic leader, but also connected the tribes of Israel to God's plan of salvation for all humanity. This lineage, preserved for generations, shows God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises, even amid dispersion and suffering. But what does this mean for the other tribes? Were they forgotten in this plan, or can their influence still be seen in unexpected ways? The surviving tribes of Israel profoundly shaped the identity of the Jewish people, who continue to thrive worldwide. Although most modern Jews identify as descendants of Judah, Benjamin, or Levi, the influence of the other tribes is still visible in Jewish culture and history. For example, the tradition of the Levites remains alive in religious ceremonies, while the lineage of Judah continues to be celebrated as the messianic lineage. Even the memory of the lost tribes impacts the modern world, inspiring searches for connections with distant communities that may have roots in Israel. But is the significance of the tribes beyond their history? Do they represent not only a people, but also the diversity and unity that God desires for all humanity? The 12 tribes of Israel are not just an ancient story. They represent a call to unity amid diversity. Each tribe had a unique role in God's plan, but all were part of one people, chosen to be a light to the nations. In the book of Revelation, we see a powerful vision, 12,000 from each tribe being sealed, symbolizing the redemption and restoration of God's people. This image reminds us that, to God, every tribe, every nation, and every person has a special purpose. The story of the tribes is therefore a story of hope and promise, a story that is still being written. May we learn from God's faithfulness to the tribes of Israel and find our place in his greater plan of redemption and divine unity. And now I ask you, what role do you believe these tribes play in God's plan for the future? The 12 tribes of Israel are not just a historical memory. They have a significant role in God's final plan for humanity. In Revelation 7, we find a powerful vision. 12,000 people from each tribe are sealed, totaling 144,000, representing God's chosen people. But what does this mean? This vision is not just a literal number. It symbolizes the fullness of redemption, a promise that God will restore all things. The 12 tribes, representing the diversity and unity of God's people, are a reminder that no one is forgotten in God's plan. Even the lost tribes are included in this vision of hope. Does this mean that the tribes of Israel still have a literal role in the future? Or do they symbolize God's people in their entirety, Jews and Gentiles united in one purpose? Even though some tribes were lost to history, God promised to restore his people. In Ezekiel 37, the vision of the Valley of Dry Bones speaks of complete restoration, where the people of Israel are brought back to life. In Isaiah 11:12 we read, "He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth." These prophecies point to a future where all tribes, both the lost and the known, will be reunited under God's kingdom. This is a promise that transcends history, showing that God never abandons his people. But is this restoration only for Israel? Or does it include all humanity as part of God's plan for redemption? The legacy of the tribes of Israel goes beyond their history and land. In Judaism, the tribes represent the identity and heritage of a chosen people, a testimony to God's faithfulness throughout the centuries. The festivals, traditions, and even the structure of prayers reflect the influence of these tribes in Jewish life to this day. In Christianity, the 12 tribes symbolize the continuity between the Old and New Testaments. Jesus' apostles, chosen to lead the early church, are often compared to the 12 tribes, representing a new people of God, united by faith in Christ. In Matthew 19:28, Jesus promises that his followers will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. These connections show that the tribes are not just a chapter of the past, but a living part of God's plan that still shapes the faith and hope of millions of people. But what do the tribes of Israel teach us today? They represent the diversity of God's people, where each tribe had a unique function, yet all were part of a single purpose. This reminds us that in God's great family, there is room for everyone, with their differences and gifts. In the modern world, where division and disunity are so common, the tribes of Israel challenge us to seek unity amid diversity. They show us that God works through ordinary people with flaws and imperfections, but who are willing to follow his plan. Most importantly, they remind us that no matter where we come from or who we are, God has a place for each of us in his story of redemption. The story of the 12 tribes of Israel is not just about the past. It is about God's eternal plan for humanity. They show us that even amid challenges, dispersion, and loss, God never abandons his people. He continues to work to gather, restore, and redeem. You are part of this story. Just as the tribes had a unique role, you too have a place in God's plan. Your life, your choices, and your faith are part of something greater, something that transcends time and space. So I ask, what can you learn from the story of the tribes of Israel? How can you be a light in the world, just as they were called to be? Leave your opinion in the comments and share how this journey has impacted your view on faith and purpose.